the common man that our society would recover from its troubled times. But we're far from 1930, and I deal with a different kind of fire. For a new era of worldly frustration, we offer a fresh conversation. I'm Greg Carlwood, and these are the Higherside Chats.
Here we go, Higherside Chatters, drinking a little drink, smoking a little smoke. From San Diego, I'm Greg Carlwood, celebrating 50 glorious episodes of the Higherside Chats. It has been a wild ride. Thanks, everyone, for all your help in making the show what it is today. I can't believe there's been so many great guests on THC just in the first 50 episodes. I mean, I've spoken with comedians Ari Shaffir and Joey Diaz, vice presidential candidate Judge Jim Gray, to people like Philip Copens, Jacques Fresco, and Nick Redfern. We've covered so many topics, including UFOs, time travel, ancient technologies, secret government projects, and resource-based economies. But I thought we could take the time with episode 50 to do a little of the groundwork we may have glossed over at times, a conspiracy 101, if you will. And I could think of none better than John Scura, author of the all-encompassing textbook to the global elite, Battle Hymn, to guide us through that hour. John Scura is a journalist, author, and Emmy-nominated TV producer. He's produced shows for Merv Griffin, Joan Rivers, and Arsenio Hall, just to name a few, before he partnered up with longtime friend Dane Phillips to comprise what I would respectfully call a conspiracy textbook called Battle Hymn, coming in at just over 400 pages. It's the best resource I've come across for learning who these elite families are, how they manipulate world events, and what their plans are. A phenomenal expose on the puppet masters and a perfect topic for such an important milestone as the 50th episode. John, welcome to the show.
Hi, Greg. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. The book is great. It's a phenomenal book, not a single useless sentence, jam-packed with information. But I am curious to hear what got you out of producing TV shows for people like Merv Griffin and Arsenio Hall and into such isolating subject matter as the global elite.
Yeah, well, I spent 20 years doing TV, and I didn't choose, when I was getting out of college to produce TV shows, talk shows, and stuff like that. But it was a comfortable living. Anyway, I just went. I was in print before I got into television. I was a journalist, and so after TV, I went back to it, and this was kind of the logical outcome.
Right on. Well, I mean, I mentioned to you in our emails, and earlier we brought up that we haven't really done a broad overview of the puppet master families, their political groups, secret societies, and think tanks. I think a lot of people recognize the names of these families and organizations, but they don't really know much else. And I know a lot of the crossover gets hazy for me. I think the one thing I love about Battle Hymn is that you say it wasn't written for the believer. It's written to be a wake-up call for those who haven't explored this type of material. And that's what I'd like to do with the show, in a sense, provide a nice informational chunk of audio that someone can share with friends or family who might not take this situation seriously. So let's take the trip. Let's start out with probably the most infamous family of all, the Rockefellers. What'd you find out about them?
Yeah, sure. The Rockefellers. I started out the book with them because they are so active and have been for generations in creating a sort of one world government. That's what they've been after. It all starts with John D. Rockefeller. Everybody, I think, is familiar with him.
Mm-hmm.
In 1863, he built his first refinery, and 7 years later, he incorporated Standard Oil of Ohio. He hated competition and loved monopoly, so he formed his first monopoly in this business through the National City Bank of Cleveland, which was owned by the Rothschilds, according to a congressional hearing. The Rothschilds we will have to hear about more later because obviously it's a foreign family, a banking family that has been for decades trying to insinuate itself into the American fabric. By 1880, John D. owned or controlled 95% of the oil produced in the United States. And, that's mind-boggling right there because it's basically 17 years. He maintained this monopoly despite attempts of Congress, the Ohio Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court to break up Standard Oil. He eventually passed along control to his son, John D. Rockefeller, Jr., in 1922, and it was Jr. who got the corporation involved in philanthropic organizations, basically to ease the public's impression of the firm. The Rockefeller Foundation, for instance, chaired by John Rockefeller III, donated huge sums to various charities and causes, particularly the Population Council and other entities promoting eugenics, which was a Rockefeller family interest for the previous three generations. Now, Rockefeller's famous descendants, among the most famous, of course, was Nelson Rockefeller, because he almost became our president.
Right.
He began government work in Latin American affairs, which was an intelligence position during the FDR administration, intending to monopolize raw materials in Latin America for the U.S. While excluding the Europeans. By the end of World War II, Nelson dealt with Germans living in South America, which was a potential embarrassment. And David Ben-Gurion took advantage of this. Essentially, the Israeli faction blackmailed Nelson Rockefeller into using his tremendous influence with the Latin nations to line up their votes in favor of creating the Israeli state by the UN resolution. This was revealed by John Loftus and Mark Ahrens in their book called The Secret War Against the Jews, and they had eyewitnesses and CIA documentation to back this up. So anyway, back to Nelson. He served 4 terms as a New York governor, but failed 3 times to be nominated for the presidency. He made vice president in 1974 when Gerald Ford replaced Nixon. In 1979, of course, Nelson died of an apparent heart attack while he was having sex with a female staffer named Megan Marshak, who in his will received $50,000 on the deed to a New York townhouse.
Convenient.
Yeah. The most influential of the Rockefellers is David, who just won't go away. He's well into his 90s now, and still exercising an incredible amount of influence on policy and our government right up to the top levels. David attended the London School of Economics, which was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, and was heavily influenced there by Harold Lasky of Britain's Socialist Party. David worked for the OSS in North Africa during the war, and this explains his intelligence ties today, and they are strong, believe me. He became a board chairman and CEO of Chase Manhattan Corporation, and he joined the Council on Foreign Relations, which we call the CFR now, as early as 1941. And 30 years later, he formed the Trilateral Commission with generous donations from the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, which had a refocused one world strategy. That's something that they wrote in their own report. David wrote in his memoir, and I'm quoting this, quote, "Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interest of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists, and of conspiring with others around the world to bring more integrated a global political and economic structure, one world, if you will." And then he closes by saying, "If that's the charge, I stand guilty and I am proud of it."
Yeah, that is a very telling quote. It's one of the best out there, but your book is full of great quotes, which I think makes it awesome for someone who's a bit of a skeptic who might be reading through, and they can see these people themselves, making the case that they're part of this conspiracy. I did want to revisit, if we could, Nelson Rockefeller's dealings with Nazis in South America, because it's a story of essentially how Israel became a country, which is a huge source of conflict and problems even today.
Yeah. Well, there were a tremendous number of Nazis who escaped to South America, of course, and Nelson was, dealing with them. This is immediately, actually during the war as well as immediately afterward. So this is obviously an embarrassment. And Ben-Gurion and the Israeli faction used this against Nelson to basically blackmail him. And as I said, this is supported by eyewitnesses who were there, and as well as CIA documents that have been released.
Yeah, it's so crazy because they basically said, this is what we want. We want, a nation state right here on this sacred area in the Middle East, and they got it. And I've always thought it was a bit weird why America is in such lockstep with that whole thing. And you point out in the book that it's just because that information could still come out today.
Well, yeah. I don't think it's as powerful as a sort of Damocles over our heads as it was back then. because
True.
you know a lot of Americans they already know that Operation Paperclip took place, and there was more to it than just taking rocket scientists.
Mm-hmm.
They were taking Nazi doctors who committed the most outrageous and heinous acts in their experiments. They took everybody they could find. They took people who were developing sarin gas and other nerve agents.
Right.
So anyway, that's kind of known now. But back then, it was explosive, and basically they just confronted Rockefeller with this stuff and said, hey, play ball with us. We want the South American nations voting for an Israeli state, or else we're going to release this.
Yeah, it's so crazy that Nelson had the power to just be like, all right, get off my back with this stuff. And it's such a huge thing to be able to deliver votes for that. But let's get into, of course, the other historic family, the Rothschilds. How did they get so powerful?
Well, yeah, it all starts with Meyer Amschel Bauer, who was born in Frankfurt way back in 1744. He apprenticed at a banking house and finally somehow became court financier to William IX of Hesse-Kassel. William IX was a Mason, and to ingratiate himself with his employer, Meyer became a Mason himself. And this set the family pattern of doing business with reigning houses of Europe. Now, the family fortune began when William of Hesse received a lot of money from England during the American Revolution to supply his Hessian troops. He gave this money that he received from England to Meyer to be invested, but Meyer instead gave it to his son Nathan to establish himself as head of the family business in London. He eventually repaid William, but only after Nathan had been set up. Now, according to Nathan Rothschild, he increased the 20,000 pounds that his dad gave him to 50 million pounds in just a few years.
Wow.
And by 1815, Nathan was the principal financier of the British government and the Bank of England. Later, the Rothschilds took control of the Bank of England. You're probably familiar with the Waterloo story that you read in the book.
Right.
Would you want me to go into that? It's a bit involved. Well, yeah, what happened was Nathan had agents. First of all, he gave money to both Napoleon and to the British Army. And he had agents there on the front with both people. And so when Wellington defeated Napoleon at Waterloo, the final defeat, Nathan had the information a day before everybody else, and he play-acted like he was disappointed. And all the investors, with a sharp eye on Nathan, sold. Mm-hmm. And Nathan bought things at pennies on the dollar. So when the truth came out, the other investors were snookered, and Nathan had basically a controlling interest in the Bank of England.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be the Rothschild strategy all along. Obviously it's more complicated than buy low, sell high, but it seems like they've just been notorious for manipulating the way investors feel and the way investors act, and then capitalizing when the market is low. It's kind of crazy, but I think a big problem skeptics have with these families is that John D. Rockefeller was building his oil empire in like 1860, and Mayer Rothschild rose to wealth and power in the 1800s as well. And it seems hard to believe that almost 200 years later we're still stuck under the control of just a few families. But how have they progressed through the years? How have they maintained this power?
Well, yeah, it's, they've been, this is part of a plan, and it's generational. The Rothschilds go back to the 18th century. And, they had a very clear agenda, which is to keep getting more and more power and more control over the royal houses and other governments of the world. And they have succeeded tremendously. Around 1804, Meyer changed the family name from Bauer to Rothschild, which means red shield. It was taken from the emblem on the homes of his ancestors. This was due probably because of the reigning anti-Semitism in Europe at the time. Meyer's other sons, aside from Nathan, established themselves in banking sectors of Paris, Vienna, and Naples, and the family's power and riches grew until they could receive titles of nobility from the indebted royal families. You have to understand something. The whole point of a bank is to create debt.
Right.
And when you're dealing with royal houses and governments, you've got the most powerful institutions in the entire world indebted to you.
Right.
So you get to call the tune many times. Now, the Rothschilds have always seen America as a plum that they wanted. They financed the Carnegies, the Vanderbilts, the Harrimans, in their railroad and steel businesses. In addition to the Morgans, they were really tied close to the Morgans, by the way. The Morgans were almost like employees, as powerful as J.P. Morgan was. It was almost a Rothschild employee. So in 1837, the Rothschilds sent August Schoenberg to the United States as their agent. Schoenberg changed his name to August Belmont and started buying U.S. government bonds with no apparent source of capital. Belmont made generous contributions to the Democratic Party, which led to his appointment as U.S. representative to The Hague between 1853 and 1857. He married Commodore Perry's daughter, Matthew Perry's daughter, which cemented his social standing, and he became president of the Jockey Club as a reward for bringing thoroughbred racing to America. Belmont Park in New York still bears his name. But in any case, he was definitely a Rothschild agent, making moves for them here in the United States.
Man, do you think there's a certain amount of luck involved with acquiring this much power and influence?
No, I think it was a plan set down in the very beginning. If you read the epilogue of the book, you'll see there are, I think, 25 instructions on how to gain and cement power over governments.
Right. I mean, but they've kind of gotten lucky in that they've never really gotten exposed or completely taken out. I mean, considering the group is so small, if someone really found this information out early enough, you feel like a handful of bullets could put a stop to most of it.
Well, one of the instructions in the 25 that I mentioned was to control the press, and
right.
They do. The press, as I mentioned in the book, is controlled in the Western world by just 6 corporations. Here in America, it's just 5. The 6th corporation is a German corporation that controls most of, in fact, nearly all of the major publishing houses here in the United States and overseas. But, all of the mainstream media is controlled by 5 corporations here in the United States.
Right. I think people are definitely wise to that. At least they should be by now. That whole section of what we're talking about is completely off the table. The biggest problem we have. I mean, I've got friends who are economic majors and they don't study this. It's out of the schools as well. Let's talk a little bit about how they have manipulated education in this country.
Oh, education? Well, yeah. I mean, first of all, you've got they're doing it through the federal government. You have to understand that these people have a tremendous amount of control over the policies of this government through organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission. Mm-hmm. Literally hundreds of these members are in the upper administration as appointees in every single administration going back to the 1920s. So anyway, the purpose of education today is not to educate, but to indoctrinate children into collectivism, doing away with national sovereignty. That's the goal. And, they're teaching dependence upon the state and not the family, and they seek to destroy belief in God. You can see this over and over again, basically just taking all reference to God and religion out of the curriculum here. The National Education Association, the NEA, creates most of America's educational programs today. This NEA was created by John D. Rockefeller, who once said, quote, "I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers." Mm-hmm. And the real purpose of the Goals 2000 Educate America Act, which was passed during the Clinton presidency in 1994, is simply to legalize federal jurisdiction over curriculum. So we have, the continuing pattern of centralization, and I think most people have noticed that right now. Administration after administration, including this one, keeps moving towards centralizing while stepping all over the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, and states' rights.
Mm-hmm. Let's switch gears a little bit to talk about something. I mean, if you look into the most basic of conspiracy information, you're going to come across Bohemian Grove with the iconic image of the giant owl statue. But can you tell us a bit about the Bohemian Grove Club? It started in, 1872?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to point out that I didn't find the Bohemian Grove that evil. It's more like, I don't know, it's like a silly collection of, old guys acting like frat guys. My former boss Merv Griffin was a member of the Bohemian Grove and stuff like that. So it's they go through, they have a ceremony that includes the owl and everything else, and basically it's every year. It happens annually in July up in Northern California. And the one thing that is somewhat disturbing is that these hugely powerful men are all together and are making policy without dealing with Congress or voters or anything like that.
Well, I mean, you say that. I guess the last 15 presidents have all been members. Like, that's obviously a powerful group.
Oh, definitely, yeah. No, believe me, it's it's the power brokers of the world. People like Kissinger are lifelong members almost. But when you stand back from it, I mean, what's really the difference between that and a bunch of really rich guys getting together on a golf course and working things out for themselves?
That's true.
I couldn't find it that evil.
Yeah.
It's a bit bizarre. There's a lot of homosexuality involved in the shenanigans that go on there.
Well, then let's get a little bit weirder and talk about the Illuminati and Freemasons. I mean, in the section about the secret Masonic agenda, you mentioned that the Masons at the highest level are rumored to know chunks of hidden knowledge coming from ancient Egypt or Pythagoras. Can you elaborate on? Do you have any idea what some of that knowledge might be?
Well, no, tell you the truth, I didn't delve into the ancient secrets. I try to keep this very, sort of
down
journalistic.
to earth.
And, I avoided religious stuff of any kind. But anyway, with the Illuminati, the organization may go back to ancient times, but I just traced it to Adam Weishaupt, who started the Bavarian Illuminati on May 1st. It's 1776. Note the date. May 1st is May Day. It's become a very important day in of course, in the communist and socialist realm. Mm-hmm. Anyway, Weishaupt formed this with help from good old William of Hesse, Rothschild's benefactor. And in 1773, records of a speech that Meyer Rothschilds made to 12 wealthy Europeans in Frankfurt show his plan to gain control of most of the world's riches and resources, thereby controlling most of the world population. This is the 25 instructions I was talking about, which are in the back of the book. Mm-hmm. Rothschild basically urged using these to foment a revolution in France because of the potential riches he could gain from such a chaotic event, and that proved to be the case. So Weishaupt put the plan into motion in 1784 with his own document, which was sort of a copy of the 25 instructions. But oddly enough, Bavarian authorities got hold of it. He had given it to a messenger, and this, talk about fate, the messenger was struck by lightning and killed on horseback, and somebody found these documents and gave them to the Bavarian authorities, and so they cracked down on the Illuminati there in Bavaria and basically chased them all out if they didn't imprison them. Most of them infiltrated the Masonic lodges in France, and in a few years, they Illuminized the Freemasons there. They were actively creating food shortages, and that would lead to the masses to revolt in France. The Duke of Orleans, who was Grand Master of French Masonry, purchased all the grain in the French harvest of 1789 and either sold it or brought or hid it. And this led to starvation, coupled with the near bankruptcy of France following its expenditures and aiding the American Revolution, led to the upheaval in Paris that we know as the French Revolution. Now, oddly enough, not surprisingly, the radical Jacobins were mainly Freemasons, and so was the majority of the Estates General after they deposed the king. Now, in the wars that would follow, for literally a quarter of a century, international bankers, and especially the Rothschilds, enriched themselves through interest-laden loans to the governments at war. And, by the time Napoleon fell, as I said, the Rothschilds had become masters of European finance and thereby, masters of Europe itself.
I think it was Rothschild who said, "Give me control of a nation's currency and I care not who makes its laws."
Exactly.
It seems like such a simple plan. It's kind of ridiculous that everyone just stood by. The Rothschilds must look at us as the the dumbest planet ever, like to just be able to seize control like that.
Well, yeah. They in the 25 instructions, they actually use a word that translates to livestock, cattle. When referring to the general population.
Yeah.
So yeah, they hold us all in low regard. Believe me.
So it seems like because of the infiltration of the Masons by the Illuminati, because I think there's a lot of confusion about these two groups. Would you say in modern times they're somewhat the same group when you get to the top levels?
Well, yeah, as I said, the Freemasons in France at the top levels became Illuminized. These Illuminati moved in there. But yeah, and a lot of people still think today that Freemasonry is simply a collection of guys dedicated to strengthening the brotherhood of mankind.
Right.
This is blatantly disproved by history, including recent history. The Masonic Lodge of Italy, called P2, that's the Italian word propaganda masonica due, became a state within a state under the leadership of Licio Gelli, according to an Italian court indictment. The organization boasted members among Italy's cabinet ministers, parliamentarians, army generals, admirals, industrial bankers, journalists, diplomats, and police chiefs. This was all revealed in the 1981 probe. Now, the basic plan was to create an atmosphere of terror in which the Italian people would favor more authoritarian governments. You'll recall after the war, there was a danger of Italy going communist. The Marxist Party was very powerful there, and a lot of its members were in the Italian resistance against the Nazi occupation. So terrorist acts were committed and blamed upon these leftist organizations. These are false flag attacks. The plan was a spin-off of an earlier American operation created by the CIA's James Jesus Angleton shortly after World War II. It was called Operation Gladio. This called for an alliance between the Mafia and the Vatican in stanching the communist threat in Italy. False flag bombings made and planted by NATO personnel and blamed on the communists to kill civilians throughout Europe. These astonishing charges were proved in Italian courts by documents and later corroborated by former Italian President Francesco Cossiga, who admitted to founding the Italian Gladio operation. Now, over the centuries, charges of Satanism have been leveled at higher degrees of Freemasonry.
Right.
Modern authors like Ralph Epperson believe that Lucifer is the secret god of the Masons, and his basic plan is the utter destruction of Christianity.
Yeah, there's been rumors of that, and I was really glad to see that in your book. It's something people have been talking about, but there's a lot of suggestion that Catholicism itself is a front for satanic worship. I mean, right down to the Mass, where a human sacrifice is worship, being Jesus on a cross, and then his blood and flesh is feasted upon by the congregation. Is that not a similar type front in a way?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are elements at the very top in the Vatican who are, not very saintly, let's put it that way. And of course, charges have been leveled at the Jesuits for centuries. I mean, they were actually excommunicated at one point by the church itself. And of course, our new Pope is a former Jesuit.
Right. I was going to say, I mean, of course it's not in the book because it's so recent, but considering there's always an alternative story, there seems to be, you've done a lot of research into that kind of thing. Do you have any thoughts about the Pope's resignation and the election of this new Pope? It seems to be a pretty different situation for the Catholics to be in.
Well, yeah, I can't buy the story that Benedict resigned due to health, because many popes had bad health and just stayed until the end. So there may have been something. There have been whispers like, maybe it was due to his lack of action in, these scandals with molesting children and stuff like that.
Right.
There's also been whispers about, again, the Masons getting involved. You'll remember there was a huge scandal in which the Masons were, involved in the Vatican Bank.
Mm-hmm.
And but these are just rumors right now, and I haven't seen anything that
nothing
says,
conclusive,
definitively that this is why he resigned.
Yeah, it makes you think, though, considering all the alternative stories and all the hidden power battles. There's got to be something else there. But bring us up to date and talk about some things that are affecting people in the present. What are some of the ways these puppet masters are affecting individuals today?
Well, first of all, they populate every administration.
Right.
So they're making policy, even though these are almost all of them are unelected. It's gotten away from a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. It's now a government, basically ruling by almost by decree. I'll give you an example. The CFR, you look through history. They started in the early 20s, and they've produced a stunning list of presidents and presidential candidates. And usually these CFR members are running against each other. For instance, Eisenhower and Adlai Stevenson were both CFR members, as were JFK and Nixon, Hubert Humphrey and Nixon, George McGovern and Nixon, Ford and Carter, Bush Sr. and Michael Dukakis, Clinton and Bush in 92, and Clinton and Dole in 96. And since 1952, only one presidential election featured non-CFR members from both parties. That was the Johnson-Goldwater ticket election. And when Johnson won, he turned around and appointed 387 CFR members into his administration.
Man.
So, the CFR, and the trilaterals, they populate the policy-making arm of our government.
Yeah, it's definitely messed up. I mean, I know when Obama was elected, the first time I was holding out hope that he was the internet candidate who rose up against Hillary Clinton, who I thought was the establishment candidate, and I was pretty interested in things he was saying. But as soon as he chose his cabinet, and that was a little bit sketchy too, because he held off for a long time till he made those announcements, and a lot of people were expecting real pioneers in economics and science to really get good places in the administration. Of course, it was all CFR, and that's where I knew it was just going to be another, same course that we've been on.
Yeah. In the book, I list all of the people in his upper cabinet positions who are either CFR, Trilateral, or Bilderberg, and often all three. And, he made a lot of promises about, I'm not going to, let Wall Street run this government, and I'm not going to let, lobbyists run. And then he turned around and appointed nothing but Wall Street and lobbyist people.
Right.
To be there. That was his first, in his first term. Reagan's first term administration featured 313 CFR members. Clinton's administration numbered nearly 100 CFR members. Obama is not CFR, but the top levels, as I said, of his administration are filled with CFR members. So there are people who blew the whistle on the CFR because, they claim to be just basically a think tank, okay? But a former member, Admiral Chester Ward, said the single objective of the CFR is to bring about the surrender of the sovereignty and the national independence of the United States. That's the single goal. They're aiming for something like the European Union. They want a North American Union. They sugarcoat it and make it all sound so wonderful and modern. But really, what you're doing there, once you lose sovereignty of the United States, is say goodbye to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, because, it's no longer the United States. And they will rule by decree.
Obviously, they got positions of power. One of their biggest tools against us is the central banks. We've covered that before on the show. But how are they getting closer to this North American Union? Because I've heard it talked about in the 90s and the early 2000s, and it kind of went away. I haven't heard as much about it in recent years, but they're still progressing on this track, right?
Oh yeah, they've taken so many steps to this, to form this North American Union. I mean, it's frightening, really, what has already been put in place to make this happen. A great guy to read on this is Daniel Estulin. He's been following the Bilderbergs for a long time, and he's Canadian, and he revealed that Canada very nearly in the 90s became part of the United States. And he said in the 1996 Bilderberg meeting in Toronto, they discussed the imminent breakup of Canada. According to him, the Quebec independence vote took place in 1997, and the plan was that would set the stage for a Canadian Anschluss into the United States by 2000. But the media firestorm prevented it, and Henry Kissinger, who was pushing for this, actually browbeat the the Canadian Prime Minister at the time, Jean Chrétien, he said that he would, quote, be damned if someone was going to screw this up for him, unquote. This was reported by a witness who was in the Bilderberg meeting when Kissinger said that. Anyway, Estulin has found evidence that there's a three-step plan to break up Canada and include independence for French-speaking Quebec. So the whatever is not Quebec would be joined to the U.S., like a 51st state.
Right,
Ontario
right.
would be the 52nd state, according to Estulin, and Canadian Prairies would be the 53rd, and British Columbia and the Northern Territories would be the 54th state. Now, the North American Free Trade Association, which was signed in 1987, was the initial step along this path. The original text of this has never been seen by the public. It laid groundwork for eventual combination of Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. into the North American Union. And, this NAFTA, it's called, the North American Free Trade, went into effect January 1st, 1994, the same day Congress approved the U.S. membership in the World Trade Organization. Since then, more than a dozen agreements have unified trade, travel, security, and other vital elements in creating a union and ending national sovereignties. The Security and Prosperity Partnership of North America, known as the SPP, was signed in 2005. It contains more than 300 initiatives to harmonize policies on everything from food to transportation. There was no debate in Congress on the SPP. Instead, corporate leaders and unelected cabinet members from each country received permanent positions on the SPP directorship. Ron Paul called this a quasi-government organization. Not a treaty. It's this SPP was an agreement, not a treaty. So there was no need for Congress to ratify the SPP with the necessary 2/3 majority. Instead, a handful of elites bypassed the legislature and ignored the Constitution, which grants Congress the sole authority to regulate international trade. Since NAFTA is headquartered in Mexico, its activities are independent of Congress. So you see, it's still going.
Right. Obviously, these people have positions of power. They have a one-world agenda. They're dumbing us down with education. Let's talk about a couple of the other things. I mean, particularly fluoride. I know a lot of people aren't convinced about the dangers of fluoride. It seems too big and too hard to get away with. But what'd you find when you really looked into that?
Well, first of all, fluoride is a byproduct of the manufacture of aluminum.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And it is the active ingredient in rat poison.
Right.
Okay? So, yeah. I've talked to doctors who said, there's absolutely no benefit of fluoride to teeth after childhood. Okay? For anybody who's not a child anymore, you're getting fluoride, it doesn't do any good. The question is, how much bad is it doing? Well, there is a condition called fluorosis, that's pretty widespread now, and it's even among teenagers where the enamel has gone off their teeth. God knows what it does to the bones. Mm-hmm. Fluoride was used to pacify people. The Russians, the Soviets, discovered this trait and used it in their gulags to, keep the inmates calm and not troublesome.
Yeah, you say it calms aggressive tendencies and lowers IQs of children. I mean, that's pretty damning,
Yeah, I know, but it also kind of fits in with the goals.
The agenda, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. It's they don't want intelligent people; they want good workers.
Another modern conspiracy, a popular motif in pop culture, is the paranoid conspiracy theorist who's freaking out about RFID chips. But it seems like this should be a real concern of people's today, no?
Well, yeah, because the RFID chip, when tested on mice, caused tumors, and it's like. I questioned a guy, and he said, well, there's a difference between mice and humans. And I go, yeah, okay, would you let your kids be chipped? And he thought for a second, and he said, no. So, come on.
Right.
It's shown to cause tumors, okay? Nobody wants tumors. Nobody wants something in them that causes tumors. And that's just one reason. The other thing is, how it can be used. The Rockefellers have this idea that if everybody gets chipped, then, they can have access to all of their financial and health information,
Right.
stuff like that. And if somebody becomes obnoxious, they just turn off the chip, and all of a sudden the guy can't get a job, he can't get Social Security, he can't get anything, he can't get a license, a driver's license. He's been made a non-person.
Yeah. It's a scary thing, but I mean, it's already in passports. It's there with not much resistance, and I do think this is going to be a real challenge. I guess when I look at the big overarching theme here, it's like they seem to be getting super close to their objectives, but the trump card seems to be the hardest to get over. It seems like, that might be the wake-up call that people need, but I cannot see the whole country willingly getting a radio transmitter implanted in them. I cannot see that happening, but it is in the healthcare bill the Obamacare bill that came out a few years ago. No?
Well, yeah, and of course, I got a lot of flack for mentioning that, because apparently they took it out before they actually passed the bill. I wrote this in 2010, and it was still in there then. So I just didn't change it. But the way it was written originally was that it's not mandatory, but if you want Obamacare, you have to have it. So in fact, it is mandatory, basically.
And, they may have taken it out of the bill because of the heat on it, but it's the motivation that's important. Why put it in there at all? Clearly they want this in there, and, maybe it got caught this time in this 100-page bill they put out, but they'll put it in again. And
go ahead. They'll find a way to sneak it in. That's what they do with all these bills. They're all 2,000 pages long, and the Congress has basically 10 minutes to read them. So anyway, that's the sad state of our democracy right now.
Yeah.
But that's frightening. I have this funny thing where they have this truck, that goes around chipping people. Mm-hmm. It's like a cool thing to do. Get chipped. And
right.
I wish people would, just stop and think for a moment. What are the connotations of this?
Yeah, another area people worry about in modern conspiracy is the vaccines. And you have a chapter in Battle Hymn called The Cancer Dance. Everybody today realizes there's been a serious spike in cancer, and everyone has a different theory as to why. But I guess there seems to be a link between the polio vaccine and a spike in soft tissue cancer.
And I got a lot of this information from Edward Haslam, the author. The polio vaccine introduced by Albert Sabin in 1955 was accidentally laced with a carcinogenic pathogen called simian virus 40, or SV40. A massive vaccination program spread SV40 to an entire generation, and when this was discovered, cancer research was redoubled in expectation of a spike in soft tissue cancer that has since occurred. In the meantime, the new polio vaccine was quietly removed, but the news spurred military and intelligence communities to begin research into weaponizing cancer. Prime target, of course, was Fidel Castro at the time. A large lab was set up in New Orleans at the U.S. Health Service Hospital. It was supervised by Dr. Alton Ochsner, who was a right-wing anti-Castro activist who actually became head of the American Cancer Society. One of his workers, Dr. Mary Sherman, held a high position in the clinic, which was closed and dismantled when she died a suspicious death in 1964. In 1963, Ochsner founded the International Council of Americas, or INCA, I-N-C-A. It was an anti-communist propaganda outlet protecting the interests of American fruit and shipping companies dependent on Latin American stability. Naturally, in August 1963, INCA began demonizing Lee Oswald as a pro-Castro traitor. Dr. Ochsner himself produced a record album of the radio discussion between Oswald and an anti-Cuban spokesman. Ochsner's picture is right on the back of the cover there. But it's clear that Oswald was doing business with Ochsner. Years after the JFK murder, the Garrison probe uncovered a second secret lab attempting to weaponize cancer in New Orleans. This was run by right-wing extremists and located in the apartment rented by David Ferry, who had known Oswald since Lee was a teenager in the New Orleans Civil Air Patrol. The Ferry Lab employed a gifted young researcher named Judith Baker, who was recruited right out of high school by Ochsner. to work on weaponizing cancer. Now, Baker and Oswald had an affair in 1963, partially corroborated by their pay slips from the Riley Coffee Company, which was their cover job. Baker claims Oswald introduced her to Ferry, who admitted knowing Oxner and Mary Sherman. Oswald also introduced Judy Baker to Guy Bannister, who coordinated the training of the anti-Castro Cubans in the nearby Lake Pontchartrain. Baker claims that Bannister admitted Oswald was working for him. She also claims that Oswald went into Oxner's office before she was allowed to meet the doctor, indicating that Oswald knew Oxner well. Baker admits that she bred a, quote, vicious galloping cancer, end quote, the reports and samples of which she and Oswald took to Mary Sherman to be further perfected through radiation at the U.S. Public Health Service Hospital. Baker claims Oswald and Ferry then introduced her to Sparky Rubenstein, who she says told her he'd known Oswald since he was a little boy. It was only after Oswald's murder did Baker recognize Sparky as Jack Ruby. I know. It's just an amazing story. The Baker interview was on an hour-long program on the History Channel. I recommend it highly. According to her, Clay Shaw arranged the hotel rooms where she and Oswald had their love trysts. The connections between Oswald, Shaw, Oxner, Ferry, Ruby, Sherman, and Bannister, they've never been broached in official investigations of the JFK murder.
Wow.
Baker was upset to learn that her developed cancer virus would be tested on human guinea pigs from the Angola penitentiary. They were transported, the inmates were transported to a mental hospital in Jackson and infected there. And when Baker complained about this to Oxner in a note, he furiously told her that she and Oswald were expendable. He didn't want any of this in writing. On August 31st, 1863, Baker says Oswald drove her to see the results of her virus on the prisoners. One man was so ill, she said, that just 72 hours after the injection, he didn't know where he was, and he would die 25 days later. With this, Oxner convinced Baker to return to her Florida home. Now, the plan was for Oswald to take the virus to Mexico City, where he would hand it to a medical technician. And from Mexico, it would go to Havana and pass to a member of Castro's medical team who had been turned. When Castro went to Mexico, when Oswald went to Mexico, he never found his contact, though, and his attempts to bring the material to Cuba himself failed because he couldn't secure a visa. So he returned, and he was sent to Dallas, his new cover job at the school book depository. And his handlers told him that the Castro mission had been aborted due to damage in Cuba by a recent hurricane. So Oswald continued to speak to Baker via special phone line set up by Ferry through his mafia contacts. At least 14 conversations between Dallas and Miami took place, according to Baker, who said Oswald's tone became more desperate as time passed. He told her that he'd penetrated a ring with the help of Shaw and Ferry that required him to pretend he wanted to see JFK eliminated. Baker claims that Oswald told her of 3 locations in Dallas where the hit was being set up. Baker claims Oswald said he wasn't afraid of dying, but feared he would be blamed for JFK's death and that his kids would never know the truth. The pair last spoke on November 20th, 1963, when Oswald assured her that he was not alone in trying to save JFK and that there was one and perhaps 2 others with the same goal. But he added that it was impossible to remove himself from the situation he penetrated because he and his family would be killed. They ended this last phone call by reciting the Lord's Prayer, and we all know what happened after that.
A lot of good that did him.
Yeah.
Man, some of that's a really fascinating story. That was one of my favorite sections of the book, but some of these attacks on people may be a bit hard to believe, but you write in the book that congressional investigations have revealed that there have been over 20,000 secret experiments and tests carried out on American citizens since 1910. That is a lot, man.
Yeah, and that's probably just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah,
those are
that's
the ones
just
we
what's
know
on
about.
record.
And they continue to go on. I mean, you look at that and you see, an unbroken history of just no regard for the safety and the rights of citizens. It's sickening. I mean, we all know about syphilis experiments on the black people in the South, and
Basically just
that's
giving them, for people who don't know, they basically just gave them a placebo and watched the effects kill them,
exactly,
right?
yeah. The whole point of the thing was just to see how the disease developed.
Ah, man.
And and of course, they picked the poorest people they could find, just totally helpless and somewhat ignorant, I guess. But it just shows the ruthlessness that's involved in
Yeah, I
some
mean,
of these.
it goes back to these families at the top of the pyramid. They've gained control and maintained control for a couple hundred years now, and it's ridiculous. I mean, it's odd that they can get their families on board, that they can just get their kids to carry on their legacy, because it is such a patient plan.
Yeah, it is a patient plan. You're right. It's generational, and I don't know how close it is to fruition, but I am disturbed deeply by our government agencies purchasing all this weaponry and ammunition.
Well, an odd thing about that is that that's a story that's being pushed forth in the mainstream news now, that the government is stockpiling weapons and stockpiling ammunition. That's odd that they would report on that.
Well, it might be a warning too. Of obviously they're doing that because they're expecting some sort of major social unrest.
It's all pretty damning stuff. I mean, what do you think is next on the agenda? Obviously, they're pushing towards a one-world government, and Obama seems to have moved the needle pretty damn far in the global elite's direction. But do you think there'll be a catalyst that prompts them to start filling up these FEMA camps people hear about?
Yes, I do. I don't know what it'll be, but some sort of emergency will be fomented. In other words, created by
Right.
these people. It could be, another terrorist attack. It could be a worldwide infection, disease.
Mm-hmm.
It could be a number of things. The purpose being to give them an excuse to enact these emergency measures that are already in place, which basically end the democratic system.
Man, I think skeptics look at this and they hear people talking about it, and it seems like every major event for the past couple hundred years is completely orchestrated by these families, and that's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people, that somebody has that much power. But it seems like there's nothing just happens in this world.
Yeah. Well, I still think, sometimes things just happen, but these people know how to take advantage of it very quickly. War is good news to the bankers.
Mm-hmm.
That means nations have to borrow huge amounts of money and then turn around and use that money to, buy and create, manufacture munitions, and they own the munitions companies. So, they're getting their money
Right.
back, the principal, right away, plus they're charging ridiculous interest on the loans. So, they're making money hand over foot. The governments are completely at their mercy. And, war is just good business.
Man, when our governments can't even overcome this power structure, it seems tough, almost impossible for the individual. Do you think there's a way to beat them? There's a lot of talk about resource-based economies and getting beyond a monetary system. It seems like that really is the only solution, because their value or their power is determined by the perceived value of currency. Like, if we were able to flip that switch, it seems like their power would kind of dissipate. I mean, is there any other way to get around this?
Well, yeah. I would start by abolishing the Federal Reserve System. That's a privately owned corporation.
Right,
And,
right.
they charge a lot of money in interest to print our money, when our own Treasury Department could very easily do it and legally do it for free. They've done it before.
Mm-hmm.
As I pointed out in the book, I'm not making any suggestions here, but there are only two presidents who went around the central bank and had the Treasury Department print our own money. That was Abraham Lincoln when he did the greenbacks in the Civil War, and John F. Kennedy when he used our silver reserves to create $4.5 billion of federal Treasury printed bills. Neither one of them made it. Okay, both were killed publicly in office.
That should send a message, shouldn't it?
Well, yeah, and I try to point out to people that John Kennedy, if they wanted to get rid of him, they could have always poisoned him,
Mm-hmm.
and it would have looked. He was a sick man anyway, very ill, so it could have been natural causes, but no, they publicly executed him as if to send a message.
That makes me wonder why a guy like Ron Paul, who's doing more to stir up anti-sentiment against the Federal Reserve, like, why is he even allowed to talk? If you off that one man, it seems like that would have gone away a couple of years ago.
Well, yeah, if Ron Paul had won the election, you would see something different. But
Right.
he's inconsequential to them now. He's an old guy. He did very poorly in the election. So
Yeah, much to the credit of the media for not covering him in a lot of cases.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's portrayed as some kind of goofball.
Right. As all of us are, anyone who's looking into this field is portrayed that way.
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, look at how they portrayed Goldwater in 1964. It was, some nuclear cowboy who was, going to start World War III. And, also that he's, a cretin. And so Johnson, in the meantime, is running on the peace campaign. Mm-hmm. And as soon as he wins, we have the credibility gaps, where he just turns right around and kicks up the Vietnam War.
Man. Is there any point where you would get out of the country?
Well, what me personally?
Yeah.
No, not yet.
Not yet? I mean, well, that's the whole talk about World War II, is that there were a lot of Jews that wanted to get out, but they waited too long.
Yeah. Well, it's a bit different. Suddenly, martial law is instituted. Yeah, that's serious.
Yeah, it seems like there might be, when it happens, I think it might all happen at once, and it might be tougher to get out of the country. But I'm just curious because you've done so much work into it. I know people look into this and they start to get a bit paranoid. I actually been considering getting away to somewhere a little more tropical, a little less under the control of these families. But it seems like there's really not anywhere to go and still have some type of modern convenience of any kind.
Right, yeah, especially if there's a North American Union, so you have to get the heck out of North America completely.
Right.
But, Dane Phillips is very serious about that. He's actually bought a lot of survival stuff. He's prepared to hit the road. Me, I'm just sitting back here watching things happen, I guess. There certainly are some people who, are making preparations.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like a very daunting task, but on one hand, it's like, why have the knowledge if you're still going to be a victim to the plan to some extent, if it were to go a little bit further? Yeah,
well, I feel like I've done some good by just alerting people by writing this book.
Absolutely.
And trying to present things in a very factual and easy to digest manner. Because the material in here is somewhat shocking, and it's difficult for people to accept it, even with the journalistic backing,
Mm-hmm.
and the sources that I present. So anyway, I've done that at least.
Yeah, I mean, that's the step one, is education, of course. But that pretty much does it, man. Wow, that was a great talk. For anyone who hasn't looked at Battle Hymn, you really should. There's so much we didn't cover. There's so much you can't cover in just an hour. We just kind of took some points and tried to create a bit of a cohesive story here. But excellent conversation, man. You're very knowledgeable. I'm really impressed with the book. I recommend it, obviously, to anyone who has people who are a little bit on the fence. I think you could give them this book and kind of bring them to our side.
Can I tell your audience where to get it?
Absolutely.
Aside from the usual online place, really the best place is just to get it straight from the publisher. Go to blackrosewriting.com. That's blackrosewriting.com, and it's cheaper there for you. You'll get a better deal there.
Yeah, we're getting screwed enough, right?
Yeah.
Any little thing helps. But is there anything? This book's a couple years old. Are you working on anything new in this area?
Not in this area, no. I'm working on another book. It's another nonfiction book.
All right. Well, do you want to tell people a little bit about that, or?
Well, no, because I'm still in the research stage. I like to keep things close to the vest until it's published and copyrighted.
Smart.
Like that.
All right. Well, is there anywhere people can keep up with you online or check in on what you're doing?
Well, yeah. Actually, I'm not associated with Dane's website, which is battlehymn.com. and bbnworldnews.com, but it is a parallel website. We share the same interests, and Dane takes a little bit more of a religious slant on it.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, if they're interested in seeing more, battlehymn.com and bbnworldnews.com are good sites.
Nice. Well, that about does it for us, man. Again, thanks for dedicating yourself to such a thorough examination into some of the most hidden information out there. It really was great. Any final comments?
No, just thank you for having me, Greg, and, maybe we'll chat again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, John. Take care.
Bye-bye, Greg.
Bye. Whoop, there it is, guys. Hopefully now you've gotten a good chunk of alternative history, or actual history, I should say. John's very knowledgeable.